When I woke up, my whole body felt like it had been wrung out and thrown back onto the bed. The light was the first thing that hurt me. Not just bright, flat, sterile, merciless, like it was trying to expose every weakness I'd spent years hiding. My mouth tasted like metal and dry pennies, and my tongue felt too heavy, like it didn't belong to me. Somewhere near my shoulder, a monitor kept making this thin, steady beep that sounded calm, but made my stomach tighten anyway. I tried to shift, and pain sparked through my muscles. Deep, full-body soreness, the kind you feel after you've fought something for hours without realizing you were fighting. My throat burned when I swallowed, and for a second I couldn't tell if I'd been asleep or simply gone. Then I saw her. My daughter was sitting in that stiff hospital chair, pulled in close to the bed like she'd been guarding it. Hoodie on, knees tucked up, hair tied back in a way that looked rushed. She wasn't crying. That was what scared me most. Her eyes were red, but her face was controlled. Too controlled. Like she'd used up all her tears earlier, and now she was running on something harder. She noticed my eyes open and leaned forward instantly, like she'd been waiting for that exact moment to prove I was still real. "Dad," she said quietly. I tried to answer, but my voice came out as a rough breath. I forced a sound anyway, because the silence between us felt dangerous. "Hey," I managed. Her jaw tightened. Her hand hovered over the bed rail, unsure if she was allowed to touch me, unsure if touching me would make her break. "Don't do that again," she whispered. That sentence didn't land like teenage attitude. It landed like exhaustion, like fear that had been carried for a long time. And right then, before any doctor explained anything, before I remembered my own name clearly, I realized something that hurt worse than my bruised body. Whatever happened to me, my daughter had been the one left to deal with it. Before all of this, I would have told you my life was fine in the way people say fine when they don't want follow-up questions. I was 47, divorced, working, paying support, keeping the calendar straight, showing up when it mattered. I wasn't crashing cars, I wasn't missing rent, I wasn't falling apart in public. That's what I used as proof that nothing was wrong. But the truth was, I lived in a kind of functional numbness that felt normal only because it had lasted long enough to become my baseline. My days had a tight routine. Wake up too early, caffeinate hard, push through work, come home, handle whatever needed handling, and then stay awake too late because sleep felt like surrender. The quiet hours were the worst, not because something dramatic happened, but because nothing happened, and that emptiness had room to speak. When my daughter came over, I became the best version of myself on purpose. I cleaned the apartment like I was staging it for inspection. I stocked the fridge like I was trying to prove I was capable of being a full parent on my own. I kept my tone light, my jokes ready, my questions practical. School, homework, food, plans. I didn't ask the deeper things, and I didn't offer mine, because emotional honesty felt like a door you open and then can't close. After she went back to her mom's, the place would settle into this heavy stillness. The hum of the fridge, the distant traffic, the tick of the thermostat, tiny sounds that felt louder when you're alone. That's when I'd sit at the kitchen counter with another cup of coffee I didn't need, scrolling my phone like it was going to hand me a reason to feel better. I told myself I was handling it. I told myself being a good dad meant being dependable, not emotional. That love was shown through consistency, not through talking. That my job was to be steady, even if I felt hollow. And maybe that would have been survivable if my body hadn't started trying to interrupt the act. Because looking back now, I can see it clearly. I wasn't just avoiding feelings. I was ignoring signals. I was living like a man who believed time was guaranteed, and that whatever I didn't face today would politely wait for me tomorrow. The first sign wasn't pain. It wasn't a dramatic warning that forced me to sit down and call a doctor. It was something stranger, something easy to dismiss because it didn't leave a bruise you could point to. It started as these sudden flashes of déjà vu that didn't feel nostalgic, just wrong. I'd be in the middle of a normal moment, washing a mug, answering an email, standing in the grocery aisle, and my brain would snap into this certainty that I'd lived the exact scene before, down to the angle of the light and the rhythm of someone's voice. For a second, it felt like reality had repeated itself, and I was the only one who noticed. Then came the metallic taste. Sharp, bitter, like I'd bitten down on a coin. Sometimes it was paired with a smell that wasn't there, burnt toast, hot plastic, something electrical. I'd look around my apartment like I was going to catch the scent in the act, like it would explain itself. Nothing ever did. The worst part was the little gaps. Not full blackouts. More like skips. Like someone cut 2 seconds out of my day and stitched the rest back together. I'd be standing at the counter and suddenly realize I couldn't remember walking into the room. I'd open a text thread and see I'd typed something, but I didn't remember writing it. Once, I drove to a familiar intersection and for a heartbeat couldn't place where I was, even though I'd taken that route 100 times. Every time it passed, relief washed over me so strongly that it became its own kind of addiction. Relief let me pretend nothing happened. Relief let me go back to fine. I told myself it was stress, sleep deprivation, too much caffeine. I told myself every adult man hits a point where the brain gets foggy and the body gets weird. I told myself I'd fix it later, after work calmed down, after the next deadline, after the next week. But later is a comfortable lie, and I was fluent in it. My mood started changing in ways I didn't want to admit. I got more irritable, not explosively, but sharply, like my patience had thinned and everything rubbed against it. Small inconveniences made my chest tighten. A slow cashier, a loud coworker, a minor change of plans. I'd feel this heat rise in me, and I'd clamp down on it. And then I'd go home exhausted like I'd been fighting all day. My daughter noticed the edges first. One evening, she was at my place doing homework at the kitchen table while I cooked something simple. I remember the pan sizzling, the smell of onions, the sound of her pencil tapping. She glanced up and asked, casual on purpose, "Are you sleeping okay?" It should have been nothing. A kid's question. But it hit me like a spotlight, because it meant she'd been paying attention. It meant I wasn't hiding as well as I thought. "I'm fine," I said too quickly, and the sharpness in my voice surprised even me. She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly, but her eyes stayed on my face a second longer than normal, like she was studying me. Then she looked back down at her paper and kept writing, but the tapping stopped. Have you ever realized someone younger than you is quietly tracking your stability, like they're taking notes on whether it's safe to relax? Just sit with that for a second. Imagine being 15 and feeling like you have to monitor the adult in the room. That's what I didn't understand then. I thought I was protecting my daughter from my loneliness by keeping things light. What I was really doing was forcing her to sense the truth without giving her any words for it, forcing her to carry worry in silence, the same way I did. And as the weeks went on, the spells didn't stop. They got closer together. They got bolder. And I kept telling myself I'd handle it, right up until the moment my brain decided I wasn't in charge anymore. The day it happened wasn't dramatic at first, which is what makes it hard to explain to people who expect disaster to announce itself. It was a regular afternoon, the kind you barely remember when nothing goes wrong. I'd worked too long, answered too many emails, drank too much coffee without eating enough real food, and told myself I'd make up for it later the same way I always did. My daughter wasn't with me that day. It was one of those in-between stretches when the apartment feels even emptier because you've recently had someone in it, and now it's gone quiet again. I remember thinking I should call her, just to hear her voice for a minute, but I didn't. I told myself I didn't want to bother her. I told myself she was busy. I told myself there'd be time. I came home and tossed my keys into the bowl by the door. The sound echoed, sharp against the stillness. I stood there for a second longer than normal, like my body was waiting for instructions my brain hadn't delivered yet. The first warning was a taste. That metallic, battery-on-the-tongue taste showed up so suddenly it made me swallow hard. My mouth went dry. I blinked a few times like that could reset something. Then came the smell. Burnt toast, faint but unmistakable. Except there was no toast, no oven on, nothing cooking. My stomach tightened, not with nausea exactly, but with a deep, instinctive unease. I remember thinking, not now. I took a step toward the kitchen counter, like I could outrun it, like standing somewhere specific would make it behave. My hand reached for the edge of the counter, and the laminate felt cold under my fingertips. The room tilted in a way that wasn't dizzy exactly. More like the world had shifted slightly off its track. Then the déjà vu hit, violent and total. It wasn't just "this feels familiar." It was like I'd been dropped into a loop, like the moment was repeating itself and my brain was screaming that it didn't belong. The air felt too thick. The sound in the room, my own breath, the hum of the fridge, stretched and warped like someone had dragged it through water. I tried to tell myself to sit down. That was my last clear thought. Sit down before you fall. But my body didn't follow the thought the way it should have. My right hand slid off the counter. My knees softened like someone had pulled a pin out of me. I tried to take another step and couldn't feel the floor correctly, like my feet were guessing where the ground was. And then time broke. I don't remember the exact moment my consciousness left because it wasn't a clean fade. It was fragmentation. 1 second I was in my kitchen, and the next second I was nowhere I could describe, because nowhere implies emptiness, and this wasn't empty. It was noise without language, sensation without meaning. I remember a sound, my own voice maybe, or a grunt, or something animal, and then the sensation of my jaw clenching so hard it felt like my teeth might crack. My muscles pulled against themselves, not like cramps, but like my body had been hijacked. I couldn't tell it to stop. I couldn't tell anything to stop. If you've never felt your own brain disconnect from your command, it's hard to explain how terrifying it is. Just picture it for a moment. You are inside yourself, and yet you're not the one driving. Your thoughts are still there, but they're trapped behind glass, watching your body do something you didn't choose. There were flashes, hard, bright fragments. The cold of the floor on my cheek, the sharp bite of something against my shoulder, maybe the corner of the cabinet, maybe the fall itself. A distant voice that sounded like it was coming through a wall. Sir? Sir, can you hear me? Then a new sound, a phone ringing, or the dial tone, or someone speaking fast, not answering. He was weird at work. Please. And then another voice, tighter, controlled. I'm calling 911. That's the part that haunts me now, because I didn't know at the time whose voice it was. In the moment, it was just noise in the fog. But later, after I woke up and the timeline was rebuilt for me, I learned it was my daughter's voice on the phone, not my ex's. My daughter. Because she'd called me after school, like she sometimes did. Because I didn't answer. Because she tried again. Because she knew my patterns well enough to feel when something was off. And instead of brushing it off, she called her mom, and then she called again, and then she stayed on the line long enough to hear the wrongness in the silence. I didn't know any of that while it was happening. While it was happening, my world was broken into pieces I couldn't hold. I remember pressure on my arm, hands turning me, checking something. I remember someone saying, he's breathing. I remember the words seizure and time and stay with me. But they were floating, disconnected from meaning. Then came the siren. Not the dramatic wail you hear from far away. This was close, vibrating through my bones. The sound rose and fell like a warning meant for everyone except me, because I couldn't respond. I couldn't reassure. I couldn't say, I'm okay. I couldn't do the one thing I'd built my whole identity around, staying in control. There was a moment, short, terrifying, where I surfaced just enough to feel fear clearly. I couldn't see. I couldn't speak. I could feel my chest rising, but I couldn't make it do more than that. I was aware of hands, of movement, of my body being lifted and strapped and moved like cargo. And in that thin sliver of awareness, one thought hit me so hard it felt like grief. If this is the moment I don't come back from, my daughter is going to remember it forever. Then the sliver vanished again, and I disappeared into bright hospital lights and rushing voices and the heavy, helpless sensation of being carried by other people's competence, while my own mind sputtered in the dark. People ask what it was like in there, as if there's a place you go when your body short circuits, as if you wake up with a story about tunnels and angels and meaning wrapped in bright, cinematic symbolism. That wasn't my experience. It was uglier and more honest than that. It felt like my brain had dropped me into a broken edit of my own life. Clips out of order, sound without context, images that flashed too fast to hold on to. There were moments where I could sense voices near me, but the words smeared together like paint dragged across wet paper. I'd catch pieces, sir, oxygen, stay, and then they'd dissolve before I could attach them to anything solid. Time didn't move the way it normally moves. There were gaps so wide they felt like whole days were missing, and then there were seconds that stretched out endlessly because fear makes even a heartbeat feel long. I couldn't tell if I was drifting or falling. I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed. I couldn't even tell where I ended and the chaos began, because the usual boundary, my mind telling my body what to do, was gone. And without that boundary, all I had left was feeling. Fear came first, sharp and primitive, because there's something deeply wrong about realizing you might die without having made a single conscious decision about it. Not in a dramatic hero moment, not in a brave sacrifice, but on a random weekday because you kept pushing your body like it was a machine that couldn't break. Then, underneath fear, came something that surprised me. Regret. Not regret in the neat, moralized way people talk about it, like you get a montage of all your mistakes and politely choose to learn from them. This regret was raw, physical. It felt like I'd been living with my fists clenched for years, and now they were opening, and everything I'd been holding back was spilling out. I saw my daughter in pieces. Not visions, not supernatural images, just memories that hit with a clarity that made my throat tighten even though I couldn't speak. Her small hand in mine when she was little, sticky with ice cream. The first time she rode a bike without training wheels, that sharp look of focus on her face. The way she used to fall asleep in the back seat with her mouth slightly open, trusting the world because I was there. Then the memories shifted to the present, and that's where it hurt. Her sitting at my kitchen table doing homework, and me filling the silence with jokes instead of asking her how she really felt about the divorce. Her standing by the door, backpack on, saying bye in that guarded teenage way, and me not pulling her into a hug because I didn't want to seem needy. Me replying, good, when she texted, love you. Like love was a transaction I could acknowledge without fully returning. If you're listening to this and you've ever held back affection because you didn't want to look soft, or because you thought love was implied, or because you assumed there'd be another chance later, just imagine what it feels like to realize later might not show up. Picture that moment where all the unsaid things become heavy, not because they're poetic, but because they were simple and you didn't do them. I felt that weight. And then I felt something worse than regret. I felt the idea of my daughter finding me. Not in a graphic way. Not in images I want to feed anyone's mind. Just the emotional truth of it. Her walking into my space and realizing something was wrong. Her voice calling Dad and getting no answer. Her standing there with a phone in her hand, suddenly forced into a decision no kid should have to make. That thought didn't come with drama. It came with shame. Because I realized I'd been treating my own health like it only belonged to me. Like my body was my private business. Like my exhaustion was my personal burden. But it wasn't private. Not really. Because when a parent collapses, the shockwave hits the child first. Somewhere in that chaos, a thin thread of awareness surfaced. And for a moment I could sense where I was. A gurney, movement, cold air, then warmer air, then voices getting sharper and closer. There was a sensation of my arm being held, a cuff tightening, someone checking something. I couldn't speak, but I could feel someone's urgency, and that urgency felt like a message. This is serious. This is not something you can shrug off. And that's when the deeper realization landed. I had been performing fine, so hard that I had accidentally trained my daughter to become the responsible one. I had turned my silence into her job. I had made my numbness something she had to work around. Even if I never asked her to, especially because I never asked her to, she filled the gaps anyway. Because that's what kids do when they love you and they don't feel safe. They adapt. They become quiet. They start tracking things you should be tracking. And in that strange inner darkness, the thought that broke me wasn't, I might die. It was, if I survive this, I can't go back to pretending my child doesn't feel the weight of my choices. That was the first clear truth I'd had in a long time. Not a plan. Not a promise. Just a fact. And once it landed, it felt like the only way forward was honesty, because anything else would mean making her be the adult again. Coming back was not a clean return. It wasn't like opening your eyes after a normal sleep and sliding right into the day. It was more like surfacing from deep water, lungs burning, mind confused, body trying to remember how to belong to itself again. At first there were only sensations. The plastic dryness in my mouth. The stiff hospital sheet pulling against my skin every time I breathed. A dull ache in my jaw and shoulders like I'd been lifting weights I never agreed to lift. My eyelids fluttered, and even that felt like work. I tried to swallow, and my throat stung, and the sting made me wince, and the wince reminded me I had a face, a body, a place in space. Then the light cut through again. Bright, white, steady. I squinted, and tears came instantly, not from emotion yet, just from the brutality of it. A nurse noticed and stepped in close, her shoes whispering against the floor. She spoke in that gentle, practiced tone that doesn't ask for anything dramatic, just small proof that you're present. Hey, she said, can you tell me your name? My name took a second to find, like it had been buried under a pile of static. I said it, hoarse and slow. Good, she said, and I heard relief in her voice, subtle but real. Do you know where you are? Hospital, I managed. Good. Do you know what happened? That question made something inside me tighten, because the truth was I didn't. I had impressions, cold tile, distorted sound, panic, but no clean narrative. I shook my head slightly, and the movement shot pain down my neck. You had a seizure, she said. You're safe. You're being monitored. Try not to move too much right now. The word seizure landed in my chest like a heavy object. Not because I didn't know what it meant, but because it turned my vague fear into something official. Something that had a name. Something that wasn't going to disappear just because I wanted it to. I turned my head a little, and that's when I saw my daughter. She was in the same chair as before, but now I could read the details more clearly. The crease lines on her hoodie from sleeping wrong. The strap of her backpack curled on the floor like it had been dropped in a hurry. The way her hands were clasped together so tightly her knuckles looked pale. She wasn't scrolling her phone. She wasn't distracted. She was watching me like she'd been watching a door all night, waiting for it to open. Her eyes met mine, and she didn't smile right away. She just exhaled, and that breath looked like it had been trapped in her lungs for hours. Hi, I whispered. Her face shifted, relief first, then anger, then something softer underneath that she didn't want to show. She stood up too fast, like her body moved before she decided to. For a second, she looked like she might step closer, might reach for me, might let herself be a kid again. But she stopped at the bed rail, holding herself back. You scared me, she said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was a plain sentence, spoken carefully, like she'd practiced it in her head because she didn't trust her emotions to stay steady if she didn't. I'm sorry, I said instantly, because that felt like the only correct response, even though it was also the easiest one. She shook her head, small, sharp. No. Like, you really scared me. The nurse stepped away, giving us a little space without leaving the room entirely, like she understood what was happening and wanted it to stay safe. The monitors kept their steady rhythm. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and warm plastic. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed briefly, and it sounded wrong in this place, like joy had wandered into the wrong building. I looked at my daughter and tried to read her the way I used to when she was younger, when I could tell if she was hungry, tired, upset, excited, just by the angle of her shoulders. But now she was older, and she'd learned to hide things. Still, I could see it. She was exhausted. Not sleepy exhausted, responsibility exhausted. The kind that makes a kid's face look older than it should. Your mom? I asked, because my brain was still trying to build a timeline. She's coming, my daughter said. She had to arrange stuff. But I called her. I stared at her. I called her. Those 3 words should not have belonged to my daughter in this context. They belonged to an adult. They belonged to me, or my ex, or a neighbor. My daughter swallowed and added, as if she was reporting tasks from a checklist. You didn't answer. So I called again, and again, and then I called Mom, and she told me to call 911 if you didn't pick up, so I did. The paramedics said I did the right thing. The way she said it, controlled, factual, made my stomach twist, because it sounded like she'd been explaining herself to herself all night, trying to stay calm by turning fear into procedure. Have you ever heard your child speak like a grown-up and felt your heart drop because you realized the world forced that voice out of them? Just picture it. The person you're supposed to protect is sitting there calmly explaining how they managed your emergency. I wanted to sit up. I wanted to reach for her hand. I wanted to rewind the last year and answer every call and take every symptom seriously. Instead, I lay there, pinned by weakness and 4 lines in the truth, and I whispered, "Thank you." She didn't respond right away. Then she said, very quietly, "I shouldn't have to do that, Dad." And in that moment, the fear wasn't about seizures anymore. It was about what my silence had been turning her into. The doctors didn't talk to me like I was a bad person, but they did talk to me like I was a man who'd been lucky. They explained it plainly. The pattern I'd been brushing off, déjà vu, metallic taste, those brief gaps, fit with temporal lobe seizures, the kind that can look like weird spells until the day your brain decides to go bigger. Sleep deprivation can lower the threshold. Stress can pile on. Caffeine doesn't help. And if there were medication interactions or missed meals in the mix, the whole system becomes more fragile than you realize. Hearing it laid out like that was strangely humiliating because it wasn't a mystery. It wasn't fate. It was a chain of small choices and ignored warnings that finally reached the end. I stayed in the hospital long enough for tests and monitoring, long enough for the soreness to settle into bruised exhaustion, long enough for my ex to arrive and do what she always did best, be steady when something needs handling. She didn't scold me. She didn't gloat. She asked questions, took notes, confirmed follow-ups, and then looked at me with tired eyes that said, "You don't get to make our kid carry this." For a moment, I wanted to get defensive because that old reflex was still alive in me. The reflex that says, "I'm fine, stop judging me, I've got it." But lying in that bed, with my daughter's earlier sentence still in the air, I couldn't reach for that shield without feeling how hollow it was. When I got discharged, the changes started small, because that's the only way real change ever survives. The first change was sleep. Not "I'll try." Not "I'll go to bed earlier." Actual sleep, structured like medicine. A consistent bedtime. A consistent wake time. My phone across the room. Caffeine limited like it was no longer a harmless habit, but a lever that could push my brain into danger. The second change was follow-up. Neurology appointments. Medication. A plan. A quiet acceptance that my body wasn't something I could bully back into obedience. I had to work with it. Respect it. Listen. But the third change, the one that mattered most, was emotional, and it scared me more than the medical stuff. Because now I had to talk. Not in a performative way. Not in a "here's a lesson" speech. Just honest. One evening, after I'd been home a week, my daughter came over. She walked in cautiously, like she was scanning for signs I'd slipped back into old habits. I saw it in her eyes. She was checking the air, the tone, the stability. Like my apartment had become a place she needed to assess, not simply exist in. I made dinner and kept it simple. No jokes to fill the silence. No forced cheer. We ate at the table. The clink of forks sounded too loud at first, because I wasn't padding the moment with noise anymore. Finally, I said, "Can we talk about what happened?" She stiffened slightly, and for a second I thought she would shut down. Teenagers don't like feeling trapped in serious conversations. But then she nodded once, small. "I didn't know," I told her. I knew something was off, but I kept telling myself it was nothing. "And I'm sorry. Not just for scaring you. I'm sorry you had to manage it." Her eyes dropped to her plate. I continued, because if I stopped, I knew I'd lose the courage. "You shouldn't have been the one making calls and keeping track. You shouldn't have had to wonder if I was okay. That's not your job." She swallowed, and her voice came out flatter than I expected. I was already doing it. That sentence hit me like a quiet confession. I leaned forward slightly. "How long?" She hesitated, like she was weighing whether telling the truth would make me fall apart. Then she said, "Since the while. You'd forget stuff. Or you'd sound weird on the phone sometimes. And Mom would ask me if you'd answered. And I started paying attention. Paying attention. The way you pay attention to a stove, a door lock, a toddler near stairs." I felt heat behind my eyes, sudden and sharp, and I hated that it took something dramatic for me to finally see what my daughter had been living with. "I'm going to fix that," I said, and the words sounded too big, too clean, so I added the truth that made it real. Not perfectly, but seriously. I'm going to stop pretending. She looked up at me then, and her eyes were tired in a way that made my chest tighten. "Just don't make me be the adult again," she said. "No yelling. No lecture. Just that." And in that moment, I understood the new goal of my life wasn't just preventing another seizure. It was earning back the right for my daughter to be a kid when she was with me. So I started building routines that weren't just about health. They were about trust. I texted her when I got home. I answered calls even when I was tired. I told my ex if I felt off, instead of hiding it. I stopped using "fine" as armor. And slowly, in small, ordinary moments, the house began to feel less like a place I survived in, and more like a place we could breathe in again. A few months later, I got cleared to drive again, but I didn't treat it like freedom. I treated it like trust on probation. The first time I sat behind the wheel, my hands were steady, but my mind wasn't casual. I listened to my own body the way I should have been listening all along, because now I understood something I didn't understand at 46. Ignoring yourself doesn't just punish you. It quietly recruits the people who love you to carry the consequences. Sometimes I think about that hospital chair, my daughter folded into it, trying to be composed, trying to stay strong for me. And I feel this slow ache in my chest, not because the memory is dramatic, but because it's so ordinary. A kid staying up all night because her dad refused to admit he wasn't okay. That shouldn't be a normal story, but it happens more than we like to admit. Have you ever wondered how many times the people around you notice you slipping before you do? How many small signs they track in silence because they don't want to embarrass you or scare you or start a fight? Just sit with that for a second. Picture the person you love most quietly adjusting their life around your denial. What I learned is simple, and it isn't heroic. Love isn't proven by silence. It isn't proven by pushing through. Love is proven by honesty, by letting yourself be helped, by refusing to make your child grow up early just so you can keep pretending you're fine. If you still have the chance to say something kind, say it now. If you've been ignoring your own warning signs, listen. Not because you're afraid of dying, but because you don't want the people who love you to live in fear of losing you.